The black-armored Audi A8L moved on Meridian Avenue at a speed accurate to the mile, as if it were controlled by a military navigation system. Inside, Admiral Maya Rourke was oblivious to the absolute quiet the car provided. That silence was not luxury, but a security requirement, a necessary layer of insulation between her and the chaotic world outside. Outside, the morning sun of the Bay Area shone brightly, but to Rourke, it was just a monotonous gray. She was en route to an emergency meeting at the Pentagon, a meeting where she, as chair of the Navy's Disciplinary and Standards Committee, had to present a report on the complete overhaul of procurement systems and rules of engagement at foreign bases. The importance of the documents in the leather briefcase on the passenger seat could change the fate of thousands of sailors. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights appeared from behind, disrupting the perfect balance in the cabin. Rourke did not flinch. A career flying FA-18 Hornets in commanding strike groups had taught her that flinching was a luxury. She merely glanced at the dashboard clock, 08:14 a.m. She had 15 minutes to reach the naval station before transferring to a secure military vehicle. She pulled the car over a maneuver that was perfectly smooth and law-abiding. The door of the black and white patrol car opened and Officer Torres stepped out. Torres, with badge 5507 gleaming on his chest and aviator sunglasses, did not walk. He strode a heavy, deliberate display of authority. His right hand rested lightly on his sidearm, an unnecessary gesture for a routine traffic stop, but a clear statement he was in control. Torres's eyes scanned from the armored Audi A8 through the tinted window to the silhouette of the woman of color inside. The car, with its exorbitant value and subtle details, usually seen only on diplomatic or CEO models, instantly triggered a false suspicion in Torres's mind. He approached the window and knocked sharply. Rourke slowly lowered the window, just enough to communicate. The smell of cheap cologne and sweat flooded the cabin, shattering the sterile atmosphere inside. "License and registration," Torres growled with no polite greeting. Rourke, with dark brown skin, deep black eyes, and her hair cut short and neat, according to military regulations, looked directly at him. "Officer, I am en route to a critical mission. What is the reason for this stop?" Her composure made Torres frown. He was used to fierce stuttering or defiance. This absolute self-possession was a challenge. "Critical mission." Torres laughed, a dry, grating sound. He bent down low, his eyes hidden behind the sunglasses, staring at her with unconcealed contempt. "Listen, lady, a woman like you driving this expensive car in this area, right next to a major military base, is illegal. I suspect organized criminal activity. Get out of the car now." It was racial contempt, blunt and undisguised. It was an abuse of power from the first second. To Torres, the car was the evidence, and Rourke's skin was the conviction. In that moment, Admiral Maya Rourke felt no anger. She felt a cold calm set in. This calm was not instinct, but the result of 30 years of training. She was the first woman in Navy history to fly the FA-18 fighter jet. She had survived 72-hour interrogations in the Sea Survival Evasion Resistance and Escape Program, and she had navigated hundreds of political crises at the Pacific Command. Her heart rate remained at 55 beats per minute. She was not a panicked victim. She was a commanding officer in the process of a tactical situation assessment. She recalled her first rule in the intelligence room: let your enemy believe you are harmless. Torres had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he was catching a big fish for a promotion. He did not know he had just challenged the entire defense system of the United States. Rourke's steel-wrapped in silk demeanor kicked in. She decided to comply, to let Torres violate every remaining procedure. "Understood," Rourke replied, her voice low and clear. "I will retrieve my documents." She reached her hand slowly towards the specially designed military satchel on the passenger seat. That was Torres' violation way. Under traffic law, a driver has the right to retrieve their identification and registration. But to Torres, that slow gesture was an insult. He immediately tensed, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Don't move!" Torres roared, his voice cracking with tension and surprise. "I said don't move. Keep your hands where they are. You are now suspected of drug or weapons possession. What are you trying to conceal?" Rourke stopped, her fingers just inches from the satchel. Inside the satchel was her top-secret CI sensitive compartmented information clearance card, her military ID proving her identity and rank. Torres had prevented her from verifying her identity. The conflict was established. Rourke was attempting to de-escalate by complying with the law. Torres was intentionally escalating because of prejudice. Officer, Rourke said, her voice devoid of emotion, I was simply trying to retrieve my identification as you requested. Torres did not listen. He turned, grabbing his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 5507. Request immediate backup at Meridian Avenue and 4th Street. Situation escalating, suspected organized crime. Request 2 units emergency assistance. Time moved slowly, 08:16 a.m. Torres requested backup without ever checking the license plate, without ever asking her name. Siren 08:18 a.m. A second patrol car arrived, screeching to a halt with flashing lights. Officer Miller stepped out of the second car. Miller was a younger officer with worried eyes and an alert, but not aggressive demeanor like Torres. Rourke observed Miller. She knew Miller was the key. He was the intermediary, an officer caught in his colleague's error. Miller approached, looked at the armored Audi, then at Torres, then at Rourke. He felt an inexplicable tension in the air. Rourke seized the opportunity. She looked directly into Miller's eyes through the window, just enough for Miller to feel that absolute focus. Her eyes were not pleading, they were assessing. She was planting a seed of doubt. Officer, Rourke's voice was low and clear, ensuring that both patrol car dash cams were recording every word. I am on my way to an emergency Department of Defense meeting at the Naval Station. Your colleagues' actions are without legal basis, and you are violating my constitutionally protected freedom of movement. Do you wish to verify my ID now? The direct authoritative reference to the Constitution and the Department of Defense made Miller freeze. He glanced at Torres, who was breathing heavily with fury. Officer Miller, he has no right to challenge me, Torres roared. Get back to your car and help with crowd control. But it was too late. Rourke had made her statement. She did not need to shout. She had said enough for the system to take notice. Her authority was not a siren. It was cold truth wrapped in legal terms. Torres, completely losing control, turned back to Rourke. Get out of the car now, hands on the steering wheel. He was no longer requesting documents. He had escalated from a traffic stop to detention. Rourke slowly raised both hands, placing them on the steering wheel. She offered a slight smirk. Torres' violation was complete. The evidence collection phase had begun. She knew she was about to endure humiliation, but the price Torres and this police department would pay would be manifold greater than any personal embarrassment. The hot asphalt of Meridian Avenue began to radiate heat, but for Admiral Maya Rourke, her focus created a cold zone all its own. When Officer Torres bellowed the order to exit the vehicle, she complied with calculated slowness. Out of the car, hands where I can see them. Torres commanded, his voice filled with triumph. Rourke stepped out. She did not bow her head, nor did she rush. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gabardine suit, making her look like a senior political leader rather than a regular citizen stopped in traffic. I am complying with all requests. I repeat, this is an unlawful detention, Rourke stated, directing her voice clearly and deliberately toward Torres' body cam. I am verbally recording every violation. Torres sneered. Of course, lady. All criminals say that. That was the final insult Rourke permitted him to utter before triggering her response. Torres began a rough pat-down search, patting her hips and shoulders with unnecessary carelessness. Meanwhile, Rourke activated the observation posture she had learned during her naval intelligence training at Fort Huachuca. This was a psychological state that allowed her to separate emotion from data. She was not Maya Rourke, the humiliated citizen. She was the tactical brain, noting the time 08:21 a.m., a 5-minute detention without ID verification. Noting the location, 4 unnecessary touches to the waist and shoulder violating standard search protocol. Noting the badge numbers, she meticulously recorded Torres' badge number 507 in Miller's 9114. And analyzing the body language, Torres' breathing was shallow and rapid, his pupils slightly dilated, leading to the conclusion, high deception stress level. He knew he was doing something wrong. I'm done with the search, Torres said, slightly out of breath. No weapon. Hands behind your back. Miller stood there, confusion evident on his face. He looked at Rourke's expensive suit, her icy composure, and then at Torres' unprovoked aggression. Torres, did we check the plates? Miller asked, his voice low. Torres glared at his colleague with hatred. Shut up, Miller. I'm in charge here. She fits the criminal profile I'll verify at the station. As Torres was pulling Rourke toward the patrol car, Rourke's eyes scanned the crowd beginning to gather. She was not looking for pity, she was looking for authorization. And she found it. Standing about 50 meters away next to an olive drab SUV with military license plates was Army Major Samuel Chen. Chen, a judge advocate general, JAG Corps officer, was Rourke's military aide and most senior legal advisor. He was in civilian clothes, but his rigid military posture was unmistakable. Rourke executed a nonverbal command sign, a slight jerk of the left shoulder, the tactical sign they had agreed upon for high-risk situations. I am illegally detained. Activate Emergency Protocol Alpha. Chen understood. His eyes were focused and cold. He did not hesitate. He pulled out an encrypted satellite phone from his jacket and began recording video collecting every violation by Torres. A code-I encrypted call was placed to the Chief of Naval Operations Center, CNO Ops Center, reporting, Admiral Rourke is being unlawfully detained by a local police officer. Request Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, immediate intervention and contact with the Department of Defense Inspector General DOD IG office. This action activated sovereign immunity, elevating the incident to a national security level far beyond the jurisdiction of the local police department. Torres, unaware that the fate of his career was being sealed through an encrypted call, had reached the peak of his abuse of power. He pulled Rourke's arms behind her back. Violation 2. Handcuffs. The metallic click shut of the handcuffs echoed in the morning air, a heavy jarring sound, as if the gavel of the court-martial had just come down. Rourke felt the pain as the handcuffs tightened, but her mind remained completely detached. She looked directly into Torres' body cam lens, speaking every word with the precision of a military oath. Officer Torres Badge, 5507. You have just handcuffed a senior commanding officer of the United States Armed Forces. This act constitutes a violation of Article 88 Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, contempt toward officials. It also violates 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 242, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. This is a federal-level felony, and I have recorded every detail for prosecution. Torres was stunned, not because she knew the law, but because she cited military UCMJ and federal U.S. Code statutes simultaneously in a tone that was completely non-negotiable. How do you know that? Torres stammered, his arrogance replaced by mild panic. I know it because I taught that law for 20 years, Rourke replied simply. Torres ordered Miller, search the car, hurry up. Miller, with a pale face and sweating profusely, reluctantly began the search. He had heard Rourke cite the UCMJ. He knew everything was spiraling out of the local police department's control. When Miller opened the car door, he found the military satchel Rourke had originally tried to retrieve. Inside was the Department of Defense Common Access, card DOD CAC rank of Vice Admiral 09, and vehicle registration issued through Naval Asset Management, proving the armored Audi was property owned or managed by the federal government. Torres, Miller called out, his voice shaking. This is real. Torres, still standing next to Rourke, ignored him. Fake. Anyone can fake papers. Check the trunk. Miller reluctantly followed the order. He pressed the trunk release button and froze. The image was irrefutable evidence. Inside, not suitcases or gym bags, but a navy dress blue uniform meticulously hung in a garment bag, bearing a large Department of Defense seal. On the jacket's shoulder boards were 3 glittering silver stars, the rank of Vice Admiral. Next to it was a neatly placed cover hat with the flag officer insignia. Torres stepped over and looked into the trunk. His arrogance instantly evaporated like ice hitting acid. No way, Torres mumbled, his voice now a whisper. Rourke, still tightly handcuffed, savored this moment of divine justice. She did not need to speak. The uniform spoke for her. Torres. Rourke's voice was clear and authoritative. You have just detained a Vice Admiral of the United States Navy who is en route to the Pentagon on charges based on prejudice and a refusal to verify. This vehicle is federal property, and that uniform is not a costume. It represents 30 years of service, thousands of flight hours, and the command authority over thousands of sailors. By this time, Major Chen had approached closer, his satellite phone still recording. He announced clearly into the encrypted radio, Command order confirming illegal arrest of Vice Admiral Rourke, U.S. Navy. Jurisdiction is immediately transferred to the Department of Defense Inspector General and the Court-Martial. Request military police MP intervention to secure the scene and the commanding officer. Rourke turned to Torres, her voice colder than ice. I am being unlawfully detained. This is a direct violation by local law enforcement against the senior commanding officer of the United States Armed Forces, she declared, ensuring Miller Torres in the body cam heard. I request immediate Judge Advocate General JAG intervention, and I require the Chief of Naval Operations Office to be informed of your misconduct. Game change is complete. This is no longer an unlawful traffic stop. It has officially become a military federal issue that can lead to a Department of Defense general investigation of this entire police department. Torres didn't just lose his job, he triggered the collapse of the entire system he served. Rourke knew Captain Foster Internal Affairs would arrive shortly, but that was just procedure. The true authority had been transferred to the Pentagon. She only had to wait for the military storm to arrive. The air on Meridian Avenue thickened, not from the heat of the asphalt, but from Vice Admiral Rourke's recorded declaration. Officer Torres stood motionless, his face sculpted like a statue, his arrogance utterly shattered by the undeniable truth. 3 silver stars in the trunk. The metallic sound of the handcuffs still echoed, but then a new sound cut through the tense silence. Torres' radio crackled with a completely different voice, deep, cold, and possessing absolute authority, not from the regular dispatch, but from a higher-level communication channel. Unit 507, this is Captain Foster. Report immediately on the status of identity verification at the scene. Torres swallowed hard. That was the voice of Captain Foster, the head of Internal Affairs, known for her uncompromising nature, and only intervening in high-risk cases, usually involving constitutional allegations or major security issues. Foster was the only person Torres genuinely feared as she represented internal control. Captain, Torres stammered, his voice stripped of its bravado. Standard detention, suspected organized criminal activity, found a costume. I asked, has the identity been verified? Foster cut across him, her voice sharp as a scalpel. Dispatch reported the vehicle was not stolen before you requested backup. Standard procedure requires identity verification before escalation, Torres. Have you violated procedure or not? Foster's question was not a probe. It was an accusation. She was not asking what was happening. She was asking what had been violated. Foster had grasped the core information even before arriving at the scene. Within 2 minutes, an unmarked navy blue SUV sped in parking a few meters from the armored Audi. Captain Foster stepped out. She was not rushing, but every movement showed professionalism and efficiency honed over years. Foster had 15 years of experience in internal affairs. She had seen everything. But the scene before her made her pause for a second to process the armored Audi A8, not a normal car, the trunk wide open, 3 Navy stars glittering under the sun. The woman of color, handcuffed yet with an intimidating cold composure, her eyes seemingly assessing Foster herself. Foster saw the truth in just 3 seconds. She was not just dealing with an unlawful traffic stop. She was walking into an internal diplomatic crisis between local law enforcement and the federal military. She walked straight towards Rourke, completely ignoring Torres. Ma'am, Foster said, maintaining a respectful and professional distance. I am Captain Foster, Internal Affairs. I apologize for this situation. May I ask your name? Rourke looked at Foster. She recognized the difference. In Foster's eyes, there was no contempt, only extreme gravity and tension. Rourke decided to give Foster a chance to comply with procedure. I am Vice Admiral Maya Rourke, United States Navy. My identification and military ID are in the satchel on the passenger seat. I attempted to present them, but Officer Torres prevented me and subsequently detained me unlawfully. Foster nodded slightly. She recognized the name Rourke. She had attended a seminar on constitutional standards in law enforcement that Rourke had conducted for senior military and police officers a year prior. Officer Miller, Foster commanded without taking her eyes off Rourke. Please retrieve the satchel from the passenger seat and bring it here. Under no circumstances is Officer Torres to touch it. Miller, like someone released from suffocation, immediately complied. Torres tried to protest, but Foster's steely gaze froze him in place. Miller brought the satchel to Foster. Foster asked Rourke politely but formally, Admiral, do I have your permission to open your satchel to verify your identity? Captain, you have my full consent, Rourke replied. Foster's action was procedurally flawless, a complete contrast to Torres' carelessness. Foster opened the wallet and retrieved the Department of Defense Common Access Card, DoD CAC. Even within the military, the CAC card is standard. But the CAC card of a Vice Admiral '09 was an entirely different story. As Foster looked at the rank and name, Rourke Maya Vadim, her expression shifted. Her face maintained professionalism, but her eyes widened slightly, a flash of recognition of the scale of the unfolding disaster. Vice Admiral Rourke was not just a senior commanding officer. She was a federal strategic asset. Officer Torres, Foster said, her voice turning cold and uncompromising. Your actions have exceeded your authority and violated federal regulations. Remove the handcuffs immediately. Captain, this car, Torres attempted to argue, his voice trembling. Remove the handcuffs now. Officer, that is my direct order. Foster's command rang out, cutting through Torres' words. The authority of internal affairs combined with the weight of the DoD KAC card overpowered any remaining stubbornness in Torres. Miller rushed to Rourke, using the key to unlock the handcuffs. I am so sorry, Admiral. Miller mumbled, not daring to look Rourke in the eye. Rourke rubbed her wrists lightly. The release was only physical. She was still in tactical mode. Foster turned to Rourke, completely ignoring Torres, who stood rigid with anger and fear. Admiral Rourke, my deepest apologies. I will escort you to the station. This matter is outside the jurisdiction of the Patrol Division. Shamana. To the station, Rourke asked, her voice still low and devoid of emotion. I will only go to the station under one condition. Foster took a deep breath, knowing the condition would be a command, not a request. Ma'am, what condition? I require an immediate phone call right here before we leave the scene. The call must be made over a secure channel and recorded by your body cam. I need to notify the Chief of Naval Operations Command of this mission disruption. Foster, fully aware that this would officially place the police department under federal scrutiny, had no choice but to comply. Of course, Admiral. Rourke took the encrypted satellite phone from Major Chen, who had now approached. She dialed, her voice shifting into military operational language, precise, concise. Naval Operations Command, this is VADM Rourke, call sign Neptune Sierra 6. I am experiencing a mission disruption on Meridian Avenue by local law enforcement. I have been unlawfully detained and subjected to a severe civil rights violation. She paused, listening to the response from the other end, likely the Chief of Naval Operations Officer. Affirmative. The incident has escalated from an unlawful traffic stop to a security lapse and a direct violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Request activate Department of Defense Inspector General DoD IG and a joint JAG task force immediately. I will proceed to the local police department to provide a witness statement and evidence. Major Samuel Chen is requested to bring the complete white paper and supreme disciplinary records to the police station within 30 minutes. Mission transfer jurisdiction to the federal military. Rourke ended the call. Her voice never rose once during the entire process, but her authority permeated the entire scene. Torres heard it all. Naval Operations Command. Department of Defense Inspector General, Joint JAG Task Force. Torres' face shifted from arrogance to sheer panic. He did not just realize he had detained a vice admiral. He had inadvertently pulled the thread on an interagency investigation that would ruin not just his individual career, but the police department's funding and military cooperation. Torres' moral collapse was complete. He stood there, his body rigid with fear, realizing he had gravely violated the very law he was paid to uphold his entire life. He had treated one of the military's most senior commanding officers like a criminal merely because of her skin color and her car. Foster looked at Torres with a cold, unforgiving gaze. She knew Torres had dug his own grave, and now she was responsible for ensuring that the principle of accountability was served. Officer Torres, Foster commanded, you are immediately suspended from duty. Hand over your badge and weapon to Officer Miller. You will stand by your vehicle until summoned by Internal Affairs. Rourke nodded to Foster, a rare sign of respect. Thank you, Captain Foster. I will accompany you. Please take me to where I can continue building the evidence for this department's systemic failure. She stepped into Foster's car. The traffic stop was over. The military legal war was just beginning. Captain Foster's unmarked SUV glided through the county police department gates, no sirens, but carrying an atmosphere of tension heavier than any chase. Vice Admiral Maya Rourke sat in the back in complete silence. She was not a prisoner, but a commanding officer under protection, and her presence created a crisis from within. Foster did not take Rourke to the crime processing area or the standard interrogation rooms. She drove straight to the administrative staff parking lot and escorted Rourke through the back door, going directly up to the second floor where the chief's office was located. Chief Walter Martinez's office was spacious, but the natural light was not enough to dispel the tension. Martinez, a middle-aged man with a tired face and a uniform that was no longer pristine from the start of his shift, jumped up from his desk as soon as Foster opened the door. "Admiral Rourke, thank you for coming." Martinez stammered, his voice filled with subservience. "I deeply apologize for this terrible misunderstanding and misconduct by my officer. I assure you the matter will be handled." Rourke cut him off politely but decisively. "Chief Martinez, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a deliberate abuse of power and a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution against a senior military officer. My purpose here is not to receive an apology, but to provide evidence for the Department of Defense investigation." Martinez paled. He had received a brief call from Foster, but hearing the phrase Department of Defense directly from a vice admiral's mouth turned confusion into genuine panic. "Of course, Admiral," Martinez said, rushing to offer her a seat in the leather chair opposite his desk. "We are cooperating fully. Officers Torres and Miller are in the waiting room. We will collect their statements immediately." Rourke did not sit. She stood, creating a psychological dominance. "Good, but I want to clarify the roles. I am not a witness. I am the authorized agent collecting evidence for the Chief of Naval Operations Joint JAG Task Force. I will interrogate the officers according to Navy procedure. I require a camera-equipped interrogation room and the presence of Major Samuel Chen, my military aide, who will arrive with the records." Martinez nearly collapsed in relief. Rourke wanted to interrogate. That meant the FBI or the Department of Justice would not be arriving immediately. This was an internal, military-led battle. "Absolutely, Admiral. Foster will take you to Interrogation Room 2. I will have Chen brought up as soon as he arrives." Interrogation Room 2 was a small windowless room with a heavy metal table and cold fluorescent lighting. Major Chen had arrived carrying an encrypted military laptop and a briefcase filled with records. Rourke sat opposite Torres. Foster stood as the observer by the door. Torres sat rigidly, trying to maintain a tough facade under the supervision of his union representative, who sat beside him. "Officer Torres," Rourke began, her voice frighteningly calm, "I am not here to threaten you, but to understand the underlying reason for your actions. Recount the traffic stop from your perspective, starting at 08:14 a.m. Torres began his practiced narrative. He saw a luxury car inappropriate for the area, suspected money laundering, drug activity, and acted on officer instinct. As Torres spoke, Rourke was not listening to the words. She was observing. The naval intelligence skill she had learned was four-domain analysis, verbal speaking pace slightly faster than normal, sign of anxiety. Kinesics body language. Torres frequently reached for his collar to loosen it, sign of tension in the throat area. Psychology, he used the term instinct repeatedly, which was a psychological wall to hide the lack of reasonable evidence. Micro-expressions. When he said, "I acted for public safety," the corner of his eye twitched slightly, an extremely quick expression of contempt, self-satisfaction, a sign he did not believe his own words. "Stop," Rourke ordered when Torres finished. "Officer Torres, are you aware I served 8 years in naval intelligence specializing in deception pattern analysis?" Torres immediately stiffened, his eyes widening uncontrollably, a reaction Rourke called the panic reflex. "Your body language, vocal stress, sun, and facial micro-reflexes all indicate you are deliberately concealing the truth. Let us help you remember." Rourke nodded to Major Chen. Chen turned the laptop toward Torres, displaying a document, the official dispatch log, time-stamped and verified by the JAG Task Force. "Officer Torres," Chen said, his voice dry and decisive, "at Air 1432, you called the station requesting a license plate check on the Audi A8. The dispatch log confirms error 8 if 1519. Vehicle check, no warrants, no violations, no match with any criminal records. Chen pointed to the screen. After being informed by dispatch that the vehicle was entirely legitimate, you took the following actions. 1605. You called for backup, requesting 2 units declaring suspected organized criminal activity. 0821. 44. You handcuffed Admiral Rourke. Chen looked directly at Torres. Officer Torres, if the vehicle was cleared by dispatch, and there was no other reasonable justification than the fact that Ms. Rourke is a woman of color driving a luxury car, then what was the basis for your escalation? Torres was speechless. He turned to the union lawyer, but the lawyer merely shook his head, knowing there was no defense against this ironclad evidence. Torres' action was not a procedural error. It was a deliberate act of ignoring evidence to satisfy prejudice. Rourke signaled. Torres and his lawyer were escorted out. Officer Miller walked in. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare. Officer Miller. Rourke began, her voice softening slightly, a tactical adjustment to build trust. I know you are in trouble, but your cooperation now will determine whether you are viewed as part of the problem or part of the solution. Miller bowed his head. Admiral, I tried to tell him. I saw the military ID. I saw the rank. I suggested checking. We have reviewed the footage. You acted in good conscience to the extent possible, Rourke confirmed. Now be honest. Have you ever witnessed Officer Torres conduct similar traffic stops based on prejudice? Miller took a deep breath. His choice was between loyalty to Torres or loyalty to his badge. Yes, Admiral, multiple times. He has a pattern of excessive scrutiny towards minorities driving expensive cars or in affluent areas. Once I saw him continue to search an engineer after dispatch had cleared him. Every complaint was dismissed because Torres always found a way to turn off his body cam at the right time. Miller's testimony was the final nail in Torres' coffin and provided the systemic evidence Rourke needed. The side division was complete. Just as Rourke finished Miller's testimony, Chief Martinez burst into the room. His face was ashen. He had received a series of calls he could not refuse. Admiral Rourke, I just spoke with the Secretary of the Navy SecNav and the Department of Defense Inspector General .IG office. Martinez stammered, clutching his phone tightly. They have been informed that systemic abuse of power has occurred in a sensitive area near a military base. And what did they say, Chief? Rourke asked, maintaining an unwavering gaze. They have ordered a full interagency investigation under the direct supervision of the Department of Defense, Martinez declared, barely breathing. A joint JAG task force will take over all evidence immediately. This is no longer a local police matter. The supreme intervention had officially occurred. The Department of Defense was not just protecting a vice admiral, they were protecting the integrity of the military system from local corruption. Rourke finally stood up. She did not need to say more. The federal government under the command of the Department of Defense had taken over. Chief Martinez, Rourke said, her voice returning to her official demeanor, I need you to prepare the following records for transfer to Major Chen within 2 hours. Comprehensive personnel file of Officer Torres, including all evaluations, disciplines, and the entire 12 previously dismissed civil complaints, along with the reasons for dismissal. Body cam and dashboard footage. All footage of Torres and Miller from the past 12 months in traffic stops involving minorities. Internal dispatch log. All audio and text transcripts related to Torres' previous complaints. Court-martial order. Major Chen has received an order from the Special Court-Martial authorizing the seizure of Officer Torres' personal phone log for the past 6 months. We need to look for external links. Martinez nodded hopelessly. Everything will be handed over, Admiral. Everything. Rourke knew that the collection of the personal phone log was the fatal blow. This was not about fleeting prejudice. This was about finding systemic corruption links who instructed Torres or who paid him to commit this abuse of power. Rourke looked at Miller. Officer Miller, your testimony is the first step toward restoring trust. Continue to cooperate with Captain Foster. She turned to Foster. Captain, you need a reliable officer to supervise the evidence collection. I trust you. Foster nodded, her eyes showing determination. She had chosen her side. Rourke and Chen left the police department not as a freed citizen, but as an admiral on a mission with enhanced authority. The confrontation was over. The prosecution phase awaited at the Pentagon. The Meridian incident was officially classified as a Department of Defense (DoD) strategic security and integrity issue. Due to the sensitive nature involving senior personnel and the potential for corruption in the national defense supply chain, the emergency hearing was not held in any ordinary courtroom, but in the Joint Chiefs of Staff briefing room at the Pentagon, the nerve center of the U.S. military. The briefing room was designed to impose authority and eliminate all distracting elements. There were no windows, only harsh light illuminating the large U-shaped conference table made of black marble from the ceiling, creating an atmosphere of cold, impassive seriousness. Every detail in the room evoked the absolute power of the federal military. On the walls, embossed bronze banners bore the names of senior officers who had served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, creating a sense of historical weight and unshakable responsibility. The hearing panel was an assembly of supreme authority, each member carrying the weight of a federal agency, each having read the emergency summary. Chairman of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG Corps Chairman. The four-star Army general presiding over the hearing was the authority with the power to order a general investigation and overhaul of any organization related to military interests. He represented the supreme legal authority of the joint forces, and his gaze showed deep displeasure. He wore a general's uniform with high-ranking decorations on his chest, adding to the sense of solemnity. His composure was a sign that the severity level was beyond all expectation. Department of Defense Inspector General (DoD) IG represented the Oversight and Anti-Corruption Agency, focusing on the incident's connection to defense contracts and federal fraud. His presence underscored that the focus had shifted from police abuse of power to national corruption. He was the one who would lead the investigation into Richard Doyle, General Counsel to the Secretary of the Navy, SecNav General Counsel, directly represented the Navy's supreme authority, ensuring that the humiliation of Admiral Rourke was viewed as an attack on the entire Navy chain of command. He sat taking detailed notes, displaying cold professionalism, ready to initiate necessary legal actions. Facing the panel chief, Walter Martinez, and the County Police Department legal team sat trembling, realizing they could not rely on local government protection. Martinez, who had not slept for the past 24 hours, constantly wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to maintain composure. Officer Torres, in a uniform stripped of its badges and a face ashen with fear, sat next to the empty chair where his union lawyer had left. He realized that this was not a place to lie or rely on colleague protection. This was the Pentagon. Torres was a local officer, and now he was facing the entire military power structure. The thick security door opened. Vice Admiral Maya Rourke walked in. A mandatory ritual was performed. The entire panel, including the four-star generals, stood up, showing absolute deference to her rank and office. Rourke wore the Navy dress blue uniform, the formal dark blue uniform, with 3 glittering silver stars and service ribbons neatly affixed. The dress uniform was not just a piece of clothing, it was a symbol of unshakable discipline, a declaration that her 30-year career was built on absolute loyalty to the law and the Constitution. Rourke carried no documents, but Major Chen placed a sealed briefcase containing evidence on the presentation table. Rourke walked to the podium standing ramrod straight. She was not the accuser. She was the embodiment of violated authority demanding justice. The JAG Corps chairman nodded. Admiral Rourke, please begin your presentation on the constitutional and military law violations. Rourke placed both hands on the podium, her composure a complete contradiction to the chaos she was about to present. Her voice was low, resonating through the room. Generals, you are not here because of an unlawful traffic stop, Rourke began. You are here because of a direct threat to the safety of Department of Defense personnel and the integrity of the Uniform Code of Military Justice (UCMJ). She summarized her career, emphasizing her expertise. I swore an oath to defend the Constitution. My experience includes FA-18 pilot, strategic intelligence expert, and chair of the Navy Disciplinary Committee. I have sufficient experience to be not just a witness, but an expert analyst of Officer Torres' criminal behavior. She looked directly at Torres. His behavior was not a personal error. It was misconduct under color of authority, a crime clearly defined in both civil law and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Rourke signaled. Major Chen projected evidence Sure Officer Torres body cam video onto the large screen behind the panel. Evidence, body cam video, the entire 11 minutes of abuse of power recorded by Officer Torres himself. The video started playing. The panel witnessed the entire incident. Rourke narrated the details, focusing on the escalation in authority. Minute 03:45. Torres prevented Rourke from retrieving her ID. Violation of basic procedure fueled by racial prejudice, masked as officer instinct. Minute 07:02. The metallic click shut of handcuffs echoed. Rourke pointed to the screen. At this point, I was unlawfully detained. Minute 10:15. The trunk opened, revealing Admiral Rourke's 3 silver stars. The video zoomed in on Torres's face. Rourke paused the video, pointing at Torres. You can clearly see Officer Torres' eyes acknowledge my identity. Despite this, he continued to hold me in handcuffs, calling the U.S. Navy uniform a costume. Rourke emphasized this action escalated from a constitutional violation to defiance of federal authority. He challenged not just me, but the authority of the Commander-in-Chief. This willful act constitutes contempt toward officials, Article 92 UCMJ, if applied through interagency cooperation mechanisms. The JAG Corps chairman, the 4-star general, lightly tapped his hand on the table, indicating his agreement with Rourke's analysis. This incident is not an exception. Rourke continued, but a rule protected by the system. Major Chen placed a thick folder of records on the table. This was evidence to Torres' personnel file and data analysis. Rourke explained the methodology. We cross-referenced Torres' vehicle GPS data dispatch logs and citizen information. The results are undeniable. In 9 out of 12 cases, 75% Torres received confirmation from dispatch that the vehicle and driver were legitimate. Despite this, he intentionally proceeded with detention in search of citizens. Rourke turned to Chief Martinez. Chief Martinez, your department ignored this pattern 12 consecutive times. This behavior is considered systematic complicity. Your disciplinary system failed to protect citizens. It protected Torres' corruption, repeatedly violating the Fourth Amendment. Martinez mumbled an apology. Rourke emphasized a pattern of 75% of actions violating procedure after receiving a legitimate order from dispatch proves the deep-seated rot in the police department's culture. This is the evidence that this agency requires absolute intervention from the Department of Defense. Rourke transitioned to evidence 3, the most shocking revelation. The target of this traffic stop was not the Audi. The target was the public humiliation of an admiral who dared to stand against national defense corruption. She detailed the connection. Suspicious financial transaction. Torres received a significant payment from an offshore account a few days before the traffic stop. This payment was linked to a subsidiary of Sentinel Defense Logistics, the company I signed an order to strip a $300 million contract from due to fraud. Encrypted conspiracy. Phone logs show 27 encrypted calls between Torres and Richard Doyle, former CEO of Sentinel. The final call was 2 hours before I was stopped. This is irrefutable evidence of conspiracy and personal retaliation intent. Rourke concluded, Officer Torres was hired by Richard Doyle to publicly humiliate a senior officer of the United States Navy in retaliation for my anti-corruption decision. This behavior constitutes not only a civil crime, but a direct threat to the functioning of the Department of Defense and national security. Torres collapsed onto the table, trembling uncontrollably. The silence in the Joint Chiefs of Staff briefing room was not the silence of consensus, but the cold silence of strategic judgment. After Vice Admiral Rourke concluded her presentation of evidence III, revealing the link of organized corruption between Officer Torres and defense contractor Richard Doyle, there was no room for defense. The chairman of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG Corps chairman, a white man over 60 in a 4-star uniform, with an authoritative stance and a cold and commanding face, slowly placed his pen down. He looked directly at Chief Martinez, his gaze not angry but calculating the system-wide damage coldly. Chief Martinez, the general spoke, his voice carrying the weight of the entire federal military. The court-martial panel has reviewed these 3 pieces of evidence. We find that your county police department has not only failed to enforce discipline, but has actively participated in intimidating a senior military commanding officer for anti-corruption actions. This behavior is not a local error. It is the intervention of organized crime into the operations of the Department of Defense. This behavior will be punished with the full weight of federal authority. He took a deep breath. We cannot allow the power of a police badge to be abused for retaliation against businesses that commit national defense contract fraud. This incident is a stain on the integrity of both agencies. The general turned to the panel. The DOD Inspector General, a white man aged 55-60 tall, in a black suit with a stern expression and an analytical gaze, nodded. The SecNav General Counsel, a middle-aged white man with a slim build, sharp eyes and an intelligent and reserved demeanor, was ready. He declared, his voice echoing throughout the briefing room, issuing the irreversible verdict, an unprecedented military oversight order on a civilian law enforcement agency. By the authority vested in the Department of Defense and in cooperation with the Department of Justice, we hereby order crime classification Torres actions, protected by the County Police Department system, are classified as misconduct under color of authority, with aggravating circumstances related to conspiracy in defiance of federal authority. High-level special oversight. The County Police Department is placed under the special oversight of a joint JAG task force. Oversight for 5 years effective immediately. This is a comprehensive, unprecedented institutional overhaul for a civilian law enforcement agency. The general further specified the scope of the oversight order, emphasizing the transfer of authority. This task force will be commanded by a Judge Advocate General JAG Colonel who will report directly to the DoD IG office. The JAG Colonel will have full authority to audit every operation of the County Police Department. The scope of oversight includes recruitment process rebuild, reevaluation of all rejected applicants, and psychological screening processes to eliminate officers with systemic prejudice. Training program overhaul, replacement of the current training program with a Navy-developed constitutional law and military discipline program, focusing on de-escalation and Fourth Amendment compliance. Financial and contract audit investigation of all recent procurement contracts to find other financial links to Richard Doyle or other corrupt organizations. Establishment of accountability mechanism. Implementation of an immediate supervisory accountability system, ensuring that any officer who witnesses misconduct and fails to report it will receive equivalent disciplinary action. The goal of this intervention is a total institutional rebuild, according to military discipline standards and federal constitutional law, transforming the county police department into a new model of compliance. Any attempt to obstruct will be viewed as contempt of military order and will be prosecuted under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Chief Walter Martinez, a Latino man middle-aged with light brown skin, a stocky build and a tired face with tense eyes, no longer had the strength to protest. The JAG Corps chairman turned to Officer Torres, a white man, 35-40 tall and muscular, with short cropped hair, a cold face, and arrogant eyes, who was hunched over. Officer Torres, you used your badge to commit an act of betrayal against public trust and the integrity of the Department of Defense. Your action is an indelible stain. He announced the individual penalties, decisive and without any negotiation. Officer Torres terminated without benefits and permanently stripped of his badge for misconduct under color of authority. He will be immediately handed over to the federal prosecutor's office for criminal prosecution for conspiracy in defiance of federal authority and violation of civil rights. 18 U.S. Code Part 242. Furthermore, due to the military nature of the target, the court-martial will prosecute Torres under Article 92, failure to obey a lawful order, and Article 134, disorderly conduct of the UCMJ, an unprecedented double penalty, ensuring he faces maximum accountability under both civil and military law. Richard Doyle, a white man about 50, a businessman with graying hair and an expensive suit with an ambitious and cold expression. Doyle's and Sentinel Defense logistics files are transferred to the FBI and the DoD IG office for investigation into corruption and conspiracy to intimidate a federal officer. Officer Miller, a white man, younger than Torres, with an average build, light brown hair, a kind face, and an anxious but honest gaze. Retained with full support for his truthful cooperation, he will become a key witness in the criminal prosecutions and will be protected by the JAG task force. The JAG Corps chairman turned to Admiral Rourke, his eyes deeply respectful. Admiral Rourke, your report has triggered a profound necessary reform. Your strategic patience turned a personal humiliation into a systemic victory. The court-martial panel trusts you will continue to oversee this transition. He struck the official gavel hard onto the table, a resounding and final sound ending all debate. The order has been issued. The hearing is adjourned. Rourke, in her navy dress blue uniform, said no more. She nodded to the panel, turned her back, and walked out. She did not need to look back at Torres. Victory was not revenge, but the re-establishment of order. She succeeded in turning a personal humiliation into a national reform. 6 months after the verdict at the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff briefing room was no longer where Admiral Rourke conducted her investigation. She now stood at the podium of the newly established National Military Civilian Leadership Academy, an institution funded by the Department of Defense itself and placed under the oversight of the Joint JAG Task Force Oversight. The academy was built on the foundation of constitutional accountability principles and designed to retrain every rank of local law enforcement and military personnel involved with federal bases. The academy's large auditorium did not contain hardened old police officers, but hundreds of new recruits and mid-level officers representing a new generation. They listened intently, notebooks resting on their laps. Vice Admiral Maya Rourke was no longer wearing the formal Navy dress blue uniform. She wore a navy blue working uniform, her 3 silver stars still gleaming, but it was a symbol of discipline and education, not judicial power. Her traffic stop had become the first mandatory case study in the curriculum. You are not here to learn about traffic law. Rourke began, her voice low and clear. You are here to understand the calculus of power. When the power of the badge meets ignorance and bias, the result is systemic loss. The screen behind Rourke displayed the famous body cam footage the moment Officer Torres handcuffed her. But instead of dwelling on the humiliation, the footage was used to analyze the procedural failure points, the failure to verify ID, the escalation, and the deliberate disregard for dispatch data. Standing next to Rourke, where civilian assistance would usually be, was a police officer with a new badge. It was Police Major Diane Foster, a white woman 45, with short brown hair, tall and composed firm eyes, and a disciplined aura, who had been promoted from internal affairs captain due to her actions 6 months prior. Major Foster now headed the Joint Military Civilian Accountability Division, a new agency directly under the JAG Task Force. This agency was established to maintain continuous oversight based not only on complaints, but also on predictive data analysis of misconduct patterns. Major Foster is the textbook example of choice, Rourke explained. She could have chosen loyalty to a colleague, Officer Torres, or loyalty to the constitutional law and her badge. She chose the latter. Foster's rapid promotion was a clear message. Honesty and constitutional compliance were the path to advancement in the new system, not cover-ups. She had provided evidence against her colleague, accepted immense professional risk, and now she was the chief architect of change. Rourke moved to the core of the lecture, systemic evidence of the reform's effectiveness. She provided not just promises, but concrete numbers audited by the DAG. Rourke presented the audited figures. In the 6 months of the JAG Task Force's operation, the number of civil complaints had decreased by 55% compared to the same period the previous year. The number of unlawful detentions had decreased by 62%. Cooperation between the county police department and the naval station had increased by 80%, significantly improving area security and showing that trust could be rebuilt, but only with external intervention and resolute oversight. These figures are the receipts, Rourke emphasized. The significant reduction in violations and the increased cooperation with the naval station demonstrate that trust can be rebuilt, but only with external intervention and resolute oversight. The county police department is now the national pilot model for other police departments under DODIG investigation. The success of the financial audit and anti-corruption efforts was also mentioned. Contract terminations with corruptly linked contractors had saved the national defense budget tens of millions of dollars, indirectly proving that the traffic stop was a small operating cost to expose a larger criminal network. Rourke projected the final 2 photos onto the screen, creating a sharp contrast in career choices. Officer Torres photographed at federal court with handcuffs and a haggard face. Torres' fate. Officer Torres was terminated without benefits and convicted of federal civil rights violation in failure to obey a lawful order Article 92 UCMJ. He is currently serving his sentence. The prosecution of Richard Doyle is also underway based on the evidence Torres inadvertently provided. Officer Miller. Officer Miller, a white man younger than Torres with an average build light, brown hair, a kind face, and an anxious but honest gaze, who cooperated truthfully, now stood in a classroom teaching about authority ethics and de-escalation. Miller's role. Officer Miller was retained. He demonstrated that an officer can acknowledge the system's flaws and become part of the solution. He is your new training officer who will teach you how to wear the badge with honor. This contrast was the most powerful lesson. Rourke did not seek to destroy. She sought to reuse and rebuild. She removed the rot and gave opportunity to those with conscience. Rourke stepped to the front of the podium, her gaze sweeping across every new recruit. This incident started with a moment of racial bias and abuse of power against me, a Navy admiral. But the outcome is not about Maya Rourke. The outcome is about constitutional principle. She concluded with a resonant call to action. The badge you are about to wear does not grant you the right to act without question. It grants you a responsibility, the highest responsibility to serve the people, not your prejudice. The power of the badge is only responsibility. An officer's true strength lies in loyalty to the Constitution, not to a colleague, not to the chief, but to the document that established this nation. I witnessed justice triumph not with guns, but with the precision of data and the persistence of honesty. My personal incident became the catalyst for national reform. Rourke looked directly into the recording camera. Justice was served flawlessly. If you believe in this reform and accountability, share the story. Because we have proven that justice does not only wear a judge's robe. Sometimes justice wears a navy dress blue uniform and carries analytical data.